like to ask you what's kind of happened to these women's lives since this film has.
Yeah, the coda for the film. I just found out they're all going to sing the national anthem at the Rose Bowl together, which is totally cool and interesting. And just in their own careers too. You know, they're all, Lisa's working on a record now, and she has Bobby McFerrin's manager's working with her, and just cool stuff, you know, and I'm just so incredibly happy. I mean, you never think, oh, I'm going to make this film and it's going to revive their careers, and, you know, I never allowed myself to think that, but I'm just so grateful it has happened. I mean, first of all, you know, the initial mandate, you know, my producer had this idea, and the idea consisted of one word, backup singers, or maybe one hyphenate. And so it was such a huge idea that I felt like the entire process of making this film was about focusing narrower and narrower. You know, we could have talked about girl groups and talked about Nashville and talked about, you know, all these different aspects of what backup singing is. But to me, the story was really the kind of the revolution in backup singing that came through these African-American voices, largely female, coming from the church, and the kind of subsequent iterations of those voices through the generations, and how that has played out. And so for me, that was kind of the idea I got after interviewing 50 backup singers in the beginning, which is what I did when I first started. And then it was really trying to find the right characters that harmonized with each other, whose stories echoed each other, but they were of different generations, so I could get a sense of the sweep of history, who had their own decisions and choices they'd made about their careers that were all slightly different, who had connected with big songs and big artists, and who were great characters with great voices. And, you know, that was a tall order. You know, that was the hardest part, was just getting the kind of the chemistry of the film right, where I could get all the right characters to fit. And it was really difficult because there were great characters who were in different films. You know, they just, you know, I had two characters that I'd shot a lot with who have great stories, but, you know, they were so disconnected from this kind of an experience that, you know, when I kept trying to wedge them in, and it wasn't working. And similarly, there were a couple of singers that were really interesting, but whose stories were too similar to Darlene's or to Mary's, and I felt like it was one or the other. So I just had to make a lot of really hard decisions, you know. So, you know, in no way is this the comprehensive story of backup singing. I feel like it's, you know, it's the first word on backup singing, you know. And I keep saying, you know, somebody out there should write a book. You know, I have lots of notes I will give to you. So. Not many of them have the, you know, the Madonna gene. You know, they're willing to crawl over broken glass to be a star, kind of thing. And I think part of that is that they're also naturally talented and have been since they were so young, that they never had to be ambitious about their talent. So when it came to them later in life where, oh, you've got to do all of this horrible crap to be a star, most of them didn't really want to do that. I mean, some of them did, but not many. And then the luck factor, I mean, somebody asked me, you know, what's the difference between a lead singer and a backup singer? And I said a hit. You know, because I think if some of these singers, if Darlene, I mean, if Mary had had a hit, she would have been Chaka Khan or Patti LaBelle or Anita Baker. Darlene's irony is she did have a hit. It just wasn't under her name. She had a couple of hits, you know, which is, you know, the most horrible, you know, irony of it. And she named her book My Name is Love, and she talks about always trying to reclaim her name. I mean, even though, of course, the name Love was given to her by Phil Spector, you know, just another irony. So anyway, complicated question. I'll talk about Judith. I mean, Judith, some of you know, after she finished the film, she went on The Voice, the reality show, this past spring. And she was unbelievable. And, you know, she made it pretty far, but she didn't make it to the end. And it was really interesting because I read all these chat rooms and I wanted, you know, why, you know, everybody was asking why. And there was a backlash against her because she had been a backup singer. And people said, well, she's a professional. She sang with Michael Jackson. Like, what's she doing on this show? You know, she's, she already hasn't made. She's not an underdog. She was always the favorite, and I think it really worked against her. And I think it's such a big misconception about backup singers that because they stand on stage and they look glamorous and they're next to a rock star, that they have their own private jet and their life's great. The whole time I was making this film, when I was filming with Judith, she was living in her childhood bedroom, saving money so she could have enough money to hire her own band to do her own record showcase. I mean, that's not glamorous, believe me. I just think people don't really understand just how, really hand-to-mouth a lot of the backup world is. So maybe the music industry's better, but I think the backup singing world, if anything, has gotten much, much more difficult. Especially because the studio world's pretty much gone, and backup singers make money like most musicians make money these days, not off of record sales, but off of touring, which means, particularly as a woman, it's really hard to have a family, which was an issue, that came up again and again. But it's just hard in general to live your life on the road, as opposed to, the kind of security of being able to do studio work. And if you do studio work, you actually get paid residuals and a pension, because they're all union members, which you don't get any of that if you tour. Yeah, well, the hardest thing about the archival research is if you go to archives and say, give me all your stuff on backup singers, they say, we have nothing. Because nobody ever writes great backup singers. I mean, they're invisible. That's the whole point. They're in the background. So nobody ever marks it. So we had to do all this research where you're saying, well, who are all the artists that had backup singers? What are all the songs we're looking for? Let's look for all these performances, and you'll find a great performance, but they never cut to the backup singers, or you find, so finding, it was the hardest part was finding the right song with the right coverage of the right people at the right time, and that was really a challenge. The old stuff. Yeah, that was just a thing that I found on an old Luther Vandross project they'd done. They'd had some behind-the-scenes stuff. And like that Bowie clip is from an old documentary called Cracked Actor, which is fantastic. And they lost the outtakes. All I had were the shots that were actually in the film, which are the ones I used. But the footage was easy compared to the music. Getting the music was, intensely complicated. And it's about as complicated as music clearance gets with a project like this. So I always have to say my producers, as good as I feel about the directing, the producing of this film was really a feat, because it's not easy to make a film like this. And one of my producers, Kate Rogers, did all the day-to-day producing, and my other producer, Gil Friesen, whose idea it was in the beginning. Gil used to run A&M Records, and he had a prodigious Rolodex. And between the two of us, we called and guilted everybody we could to help us. And it took that. I mean, it took months and months and months of doing that to get the film made. And as Thom knows, just 3 weeks before we premiered the film at Sundance, Gil passed away. So, he was the one who had the initial idea. And then to have the film do everything he always said it was going to do. He believed in it. I'm by definition and temperament a pessimist. Gil was not. So, Gil saw it, and it's just been really bittersweet that he hasn't been here to enjoy it. And I keep saying this also, hoping that if I say it enough, it'll come true, that I want them to go on tour. And they've been talking about it, and there's been interest, and the film just has to be out there in the world long enough for it to be a reality.
I know Darlene is going to play a couple dates locally in December. Yeah. She's playing at in Times Square.
BB King's?
BB King's, yes. I think December 20th.
And a couple shows in North Jersey,
in
maybe.
Morristown,
Morristown. Okay. Yeah. That would be fantastic to get them together. So I'm hoping next year that happens.
Well, that's a good place to end it. We're really pleased that Morgan could join us visiting from California. Thank you very much for coming. And thanks to Morgan Neville.
Thank you.